All righty, cool. All right. Good afternoon. I hope everyone is doing well on this, at least here in Georgia, beautiful sunny afternoon. Thank you everyone for coming along to this again to listen to me ramble on for the next hour. I really hope you all are going to get some value out of this. I will say that what I'm going to show you guys in terms of what my process is was learned the hard way. This is through me sitting here wanting to smash my laptop off the desk at times because I was frustrated with AI and get it confused and building the wrong thing or going off and doing its own thing, which it likes to do quite a lot. So this is my process, and this is how I try to reduce the impact of all of those things as much as I can. Caveat being, it's still AI, it's still LLMs, they're still reasonably dumb. So you do have to pay attention, but we're going to walk through all of this, okay? I'm going to walk through, a lot of this, I'm going to preface this by saying a lot of this is going to be like how you set up your documentation for success. So we may get to actually how we use that at the end. If we don't get to how we use that at the end, then we've always next week. We can come back and we can have another look at actually, using the documentation that we're going to create to actually build something meaningful. That cool with everyone? Alrighty, so just to set the scene here a little bit. I am assuming you all are on this call because either A, you don't know what vibe coding is and you just want to learn a bit about it, or B, you've been trying to do this and pulling your hair out in frustration at it. You can't get it go in the right direction. How you will get the best value out of today is stopping me as you hear things you don't understand and asking questions. This is a reasonably open forum. I'm not super strict on how I run presentations. I don't have a deck. I don't do any of that stuff. I've got some stuff that I'm going to walk through, but what I would say is I've worked in software development for 10 years, and I sometimes make assumptions on what people know. That's not no shade on anybody else, but if you hear me saying things you don't understand, please stop me, ask me what that means. All right? Sweet. Okay. Okay, let me share my screen. So we're going to be talking about Cursor, I guess, today, but pick your IDE of choice. This will all still apply. Cursor is my tool of preference when it comes to vibe coding. Find it really useful if you keep it under control. Have tried Climb. It's good, but it's very expensive. Haven't tried Windsurf yet. I've tried Lovable, I've tried Bolt, like those, but again, very expensive, and you're limited in how much you can actually ask them to do before you run out of credits. That's why I like Cursor more than anything else, because it gives you a number of what they call fast requests, and when they run out, you're still able to make requests. And if you want to, they have a usage-based model as well, so you never run out of the ability at a particular tier to be able to use Cursor, which is nice. Okay, so I realize my whole screen is black. I'm a big fan of dark mode. That will become very obvious through all of this. So this is Cursor. This is before you do anything in here. This is what you start with. Now it's very easy at this point to just think, I'm just going to tell Cursor what I want to build, right, Chase? I'm going to tell Cursor what I want to build, and I'm going to cross my fingers and shut my eyes and hope that it builds me the right thing. Let me tell you, hope is never a strategy. You need to make sure you are putting guardrails in place such that it doesn't go off and do its own thing, and you actually end up with something similar to what you intended to. Okay, so you can see in here, we have the Cursor chat window over here on the left. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this. Again, we'll get to this bit at the end if we have time. You have your models that you can choose. You have your modes that you can choose, and we will talk a little bit about switching between these two, because this is super important. Again, when we'll get there. So we're going to start off with, okay, so I have an empty project and I have an idea in my head. How do I go from an idea in my head to something meaningful in terms of a plan that I can start to work on? And the answer is you tell Claude what you want to do. Claude, again, my LLM of choice for pretty much everything. You tell Claude what you want to do. I will show you the documents that you're going to tell it to create. Again, you don't need to know in depth how these documents work. You will need to review them. That's really important. But you just need a list, essentially, because what you're going to do with these documents eventually is dump them all back into your project in Cursor and have Cursor review what you've created. Okay, so let me grab Claude and I'll show you what this looks like. Right, so this is where I started today. Now, I don't know this. I am the king of doing things at the last minute, so I don't know this morning. But like, this is fine. I mean, this is why we have AI, because we don't have to spend months planning these things out. We can get so much work done in hours and minutes. So this is my first. We'll walk through this and we'll show you. I'll show you how we get to the docs. Right. So this is my first interaction with Claude, and this is my first message to him. So actually, I better just show you the project as well. So within Claude Desktop in particular, I'm not sure whether the online one has this, but you have the ability to create projects similar to how you can with ChatGPT. You can add project knowledge in there. Your mileage will vary on that. I don't find it super useful, but if you have documents that you wanted to be aware of, you can upload these here. Just be aware you can't upload images into a project. Although you can upload them into the chat, you can't upload them into a project here. Okay. Yes, Ralph.
Real quick, if you're using the Claude Desktop, it's not coming through in the video.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense. Give me one sec. Sorry, I'd probably share. Yes, I see what I'm doing. Give me one sec. Thank you, man, for pointing that out. Appreciate that. That one. Yes. There we go. All righty. See, making assumptions. Keep me honest, people. Don't let me away with that. Okay. There we go. We can see it now.
So real quick, if you could go back over, since we missed this, I use this all the time. I don't use the project, so I'm interested actually in this part, so I missed that. We can just quickly go over that again.
Yeah, for sure, dude, for sure. Right, so ChatGPT and Claude can do this. So whatever you like, you know, pick your LLM of choice. They both have this kind of concept. And the idea is, if you've used LLMs for any length of time, you'll realize that your chat history is massive and hard to keep control of. It's hard to find particular chats that you've had in the past, because what you might do is, over the course of a day, talk to it about different topics, but in random order, and you might want to come back and, you know, ask another question later, but then you can't find the chat, and it's real annoying. That's where projects come in, right? So essentially, it's think of it just like a folder, because that's essentially what it is, I guess. So you create a new project in here. This will be pretty much blank except for your chat window. And then if you have PDFs or text documents that are relevant or pertinent to what you want to build in your project, you can add them in here as a kind of quote unquote knowledge base. Like we're saying, there is limitations on this. Like this knowledge base is focused around you uploading text and text documents, not images. It can't cope with images here. That's not to say within a chat you can't add images. You absolutely can. But just be aware that this is a text only knowledge base. That cool? That answer your question, Ralph?
On the money.
All right, dude. Thank you. All righty. So I created my project this morning. You guys will figure that out. You're smart folks. So within here, this is the chat. This is about 20 minutes of chat that we're going to walk through. So this is my introduction to it. I'm essentially saying I'm going to give you some images, which I forgot to do in this chat. We'll come back to that. I'm going to give you some images, and what I want you to do is help me create a product requirements document. That's what PRD is. So for anybody unfamiliar with what a PRD is, there's a ton of examples on the web of what a PRD is and how you should think about creating it. But what it boils down to is this is where you are boiling those crazy thoughts and ideas that you had in your head about this lovely thing that you would like it to be into something actually meaningful. Now, it's still reasonably high level because it's describing everything you want to do in the project. So you're not going to have a ton of detail in this bit. Yeah, you're not going to have a ton of detail in this bit. Lost my train of thought, fellas. Yeah, sorry, you're not going to have a ton of detail on the PRD, but we're going to get to those documents later on. They are like phased documents, and I'll show you what I mean by phased documents. This is, again, like going granular level after granular level to get very specific things that you can build. So, told it to ask me questions. It asked me a bunch of questions here about the project, who my target audience is, name, information, what we want the site to do, metrics, timeline, yada, yada, yada. And then it said, can you describe the visual style? So basically, I just went on the interwebs and grabbed a bunch of what look like fairly sci-fi websites, because that's cool. I'm a nerd. And I just put them up in here just to help it understand the kind of vibe and the theme that I'm going for, right? Then answer the questions that it asked me. Again, I think I can share this, and I will afterwards in an actual document so you can go through it. But I'm not going to bore you step by step. So it's asked me questions. I'm answering the questions here, and then it's off it goes, right? So now it's going to just make that bigger. Now it's going to go and create the product requirements doc. So very quickly, you can see name and description with your overview of it, your objective, your target audience, who they are, what your core features are. Again, you can see this is all high level bullet point stuff so far. What you want your different functionality to do. It talks a little bit about technical requirements. I would advise you, even if you're a non-coder, to go and do some research on the available technologies that are out there. If you need help understanding what they are, again, come back to this, come back to Claude, ask them what they are. My current JavaScript, or excuse me, my current site building mechanism of choice is Next.js. Because even though it's all essentially JavaScript, it does split functionality into front end and back end, all within the same application, which will give you the ability to make sure that like all your API keys and all that kind of stuff never gets to the front end. It's all kept in the back, which is obviously super important. Database, yeah, I've said Superbase for this. Then it talks a little bit about user flows and, you know, UI, UX and stuff like that. Cool, right. Again, not going to go through this step by step, but you see the type of things that we're putting in here. Now, again, this similar to your framework of choice, do a little bit of investigation on your tools of choice when it comes to database. I love Superbase because it does a bunch of stuff for you all under one roof. It does authentication, it can do file storage, it can do vector databases, it can do SQL databases. It really is a one-stop shop when it comes to like a store of data. So I always fall back to Superbase when I'm building something. What I'm talking about here is how you actually update your database. So again, you haven't got to know how to do this. You just need to know what the prompt is for the LLM, or excuse me, for Cursor to tell it what to do. Prisma, in this case, is a mechanism where in your code base, you can tell Cursor to build the model of like what's going into your tables. And then you can just push that to Superbase and your tables will get created. It's really hands-off, it's really useful, and it will speed up your development no end. Because your model, as long as you're continually pushing your database changes, your model in your code will always match your model in your database. And you'll never have to worry about crazy things like database migrations. Okay, probably going too much into the weeds there. Yeah, user flow. So you can see like it's quite in depth. This is the Prisma bit, so where it's talking about the models. We're not going to spend any time looking at that. I'm sure you guys can do some Googling on that. Has some instructions on how to set up your database, yada, yada. Cool. So that's the PRD. Very high level stuff. Again, you won't be writing this. You just need to give Claude or your LLM of choice enough information to write this for you, because this is going to be the basis of everything else that we're going to talk about for the next little while. Okay. So from this PRD, which again is high level, I'm now saying, okay, give me a doc that breaks down delivery of this website in phases. Because what you want to eventually end up with, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, you want to boil this down and boil this down so that at the point where you ask Cursor to do something, it's very targeted and it's very specific, and you're not going to use your entire context window and have it get confused. So we've gone PRD. We are going to go high level doc that breaks that down, which is phase 1, project setup, tasks and deliverables, phase 2, core landing page, tasks and deliverables. It's broken down into 4 phases in this one. Documentation focus at the end. Obviously, documentation is super important as you go, and we will talk about that. But that's your high level phased approach from your higher level PRD approach. Okay, so you can see in this phase, this is exactly the thing I'm going to be delivering, although we haven't got into the weeds yet of exactly what that is. Any questions? Okay, if I'm going too fast, folks, slow me down as well. I don't want to leave anyone behind here. I want to make sure you all get value out of this, okay? Alrighty. Okay, so that's our delivery plan, okay? Now, this visually for you as the owner of whatever system you are about to build is a super useful thing. This is, and also for Cursor, this is flow diagrams in code. So what does it actually look like? What it actually looks like is this. This is actually what Claude will build, but it's smart enough to be able to have the viewer in here so you can actually see what this is. So basically I said, create me a mermaid diagram to show the user flows in the system. So if I can zoom in a little bit, you can see in here, you can see the flow of what we're going to build. So the user visits the landing page, then they're either going to go to our newsletter page and sign up on a newsletter, for which there is a flow down here. And you see submits form validation, thank you, confirmation, yada, yada, yada. The other side of this pretend site that we're going to build is going to be a directory of tools focused around AI. So from the landing page, the user goes to the tools directory, looks at the tools, can search by category, and it has links back to the tools on websites. All make-believe stuff, right? But for you visually, when you are thinking about how does my project work, what does the actual user journeys look like, this is super useful for you, because you could look in here and go, well, actually, I wanted it to do X step, but I can't see that reflected here. So then you go back and you say, can you add in this, whatever this is? And you have it redo the diagram for you until you get this to a point where, you know, you're happy, kind of the flow kind of makes sense from a user perspective. So that's what it's giving me there. Then we are getting into the weeds now of exactly the things that we're going to build. So what I've asked it to do for, this is, we'll just look at one of these phases because all 4 are kind of the same thing here. For phase 1, give me a detailed task list of items we need to complete. So this is exact steps that we need to do to build out phase 1 of the project. And what it gives me back is exactly that, an actual checklist of, okay, create the GitHub repo, create the git ignore, create the readme, all the way through, right? Even down to like how to install your different dependencies that you have in your project, how to set up your you know, or at least task list to set up your database. The meat of what's going to happen in the background. So these are your API routes. So when your front end makes a call to your back end, it should be going through a back end service for security, like I mentioned. This is the very light list of what our API routes would look like for our project. Basic UI structure, that's basically going to be putting together CSS files that you can reference in other parts of your project. And then documentation. And then essentially what I've done is I've gone through this for every phase in the project. Now you can see here, when I initially looked at what it gave me back, it was talking about authentication, as in how does a user authenticate, log in, etc. And I had to tell it that users are not going to log in and you need to adjust your documentation. And it's actually quite smart at this stage. What it'll do is it'll adjust this phase document for you, but then it'll go back and look at your Mermaid docs and look at your PRD and make sure they're all reflective of the challenge that you set it in terms of taking that out. You can see here, like it's gone through a few of these just to make the change that I asked for. Okay, cool. So then same deal for phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, all the same idea. So you're ending up with these exact checklists of, these are the exact mini features that we need to deliver our high level features. And I'll show you how you use these in Cursor, because you can get Cursor to update these and go, and that's where the real value in these things are, because it means that you never get lost, Cursor never gets lost. You can leave your project for 2 weeks, come back to it, and you have an exact checklist of what you've done and what you still have to do, and you can be very focused in your approach of what you're asking Cursor to do. Okay, so that is our, any questions on those? Cool. You're all just super shy, or I'm crushing it, and I'm going to go for option number 2.
Dude, crushing it. It's like drinking from a watering hose. Like it's a firing hose. Yeah, it's good.
Dude, slow me down genuinely. Like if I have a tendency to rip through stuff, so do slow me down.
I'll give you a simple question so you feel better. How about that?
Yes. Yes.
Which model of GPT or Claude should we use to create this document? So should I use 01 Pro? Should I use 03 Mini? Should I use 4.0? What?
Yeah, really good question. Really pertinent question. So, my choice for the documentation is Claude 3.7 Sonnet, not the thinking version. That'd be overkill, but the 3.7 version. And the reason I say that is Claude, like I mentioned earlier, Claude generally is my LLM of choice. I use it for everything really, unless I have to get a web search done, in which case I would go to ChatGPT because it's better at that. But for everything else, I would use Claude. Now, for the documentation, I would use 3.7. And the reason 3.7 and not 3.5 is when you're using 3.7, it tends to overachieve, which is what you want from your documentation. It tends to add more, and you then get to go and refine that and pull that out. That's really good from a, can I review what I want to do in my project point of view. Now, when you get to actual coding, in my experience of using these, you don't want to use 3.7 for exactly that reason, because what it tends to do is just continue and continue and continue. And if you're not like if you tell it to do something, go up and get a coffee and chat to your wife at the kitchen for 15 minutes and you come back and be like, what the hell has just happened here? Because it tends to just make assumptions on what it does next and keeps going. 3.5 and 3.7 in terms of their ability to write code are very equal, but 3.5 is more concise and it's more focused in my experience. That answer the question?
Yes, yeah, I know what you mean. They get down a very specific rabbit hole and they just want to keep plowing down that hole and they don't get out of it. So yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. And this is like the whole idea of all of this, and the whole idea that I'm talking to all about this today is to stop that. You don't want to give it the opportunity to go down a rabbit hole. Ralph, question.
So then 3.7 for this, but then maybe I missed it. What do you use for code?
3.5.
Okay, thank you.
Now, look, I would say that's not hard and fast rules. There are occasions when I use 3.7, in particular, for example, and we're not going to get into the weeds in this, but when you must get Cursor to write tests for you, because tests are your guarantee to your future self that your code works, right? You must build tests as you go. Now, LLMs are brilliant at writing code. They're fairly bad at writing tests. So that you will have a level of frustration when it comes to writing tests, but just be persistent, keep pushing it. It will get them all eventually. But yeah, 3.5 for coding in very broadly, unless you get into really knotty problems, then you can use 3.7. You can use thinking mode in an ask context rather than an agent context to be able to plan it. And again, we'll get to that if we have time. Does that answer your question, Ralph?
On the money again. It's kind of funny because I was dealing with 3.7. I have a question for later, but it refers to this, but I'll ask that later. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. No problem. Alrighty. Okay. So what document am I even on here? Phase 4 checklist. Right. Okay. So now, diagrams. And again, mermaid diagrams because Cursor can understand the code in the mermaid diagrams, and mermaid diagrams because you get to visually see what is going on. Okay. So what I have here, what I've said here is creating a mermaid diagram for each phase to show specifically what is supposed to say what is being delivered in that phase. So for phase 1, this is our this is what we're going to be working on visually. For me, I'm definitely a visual learner. Having this sort of thing really helps me understand. Okay, so step 1, I can see I need to create the project. What does that mean? Step 2, let me zoom in a little bit far. Step 2 is install dependencies. Okay, kind of make sure I have all these kind of things set up. Great. And on and on and on and on down the list you go. So there is one of these. That's the phase 1. Phase 2. And as you can see, as the phase goes on, you're getting more into the weeds and it's getting more complex. That's expected. Phase 3 and phase 4. Again, a good visual reference for you as the person who is building this, but super useful for Cursor to be able to, for you to be able to give it this reference to say, you know, along with the checklist I'm giving you, here's a diagram of what we're trying to achieve. It really helps it understand and focus on the thing that you're asking it to do. Okay. So, yes, Ralph.
Sorry, I'm going to be paying your ass here.
No, for
So how did you get 4 phases? Why are there now 20?
Because this is a demo.
I just my question, and that's fine. But did you ask it for 4? Did it generate 4 based on something? What did
so I think my instruction was to break the project down into meaningful phases, keep it simple because it's a demo.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Along those lines. I have other projects that I'm working on that I actually can't show you, but they do have a bunch of phases, and within each phase, an absolute metric ton of tasks to get to. Just I don't want to show you guys that and overwhelm you. So just trying to keep it simple for today. But depending on the complexity of your project, like don't restrict it by saying just give me 5 phases or 6 phases or 20 phases. Tell it to break it down into meaningful phases and give you as many back as it thinks you need. Does that make sense? Good, crushing it. There's another question there.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute.
You're good. Chris, you got a question?
Yeah, sorry. This is where I start to get in trouble. I actually did this naturally, what you're describing, not as well, but I got myself in trouble thinking backwards then. Thinking that I needed to maybe build out my databases first so that my workflow can go through them without errors. Is that so? I'm not seeing the layout quite that way, but you have to build it backwards so that it works properly.
You have to build it backwards.
Does that make sense? My
so,
question.
Yeah, I understand the question. So what I would say is, like, if you're using something like Prisma as the tool to actually help you create the database.
I'm only doing innate-in, like that's as far as I've gotten. So okay. Cursor's new to me, but yeah.
Okay, so and again, you know, you haven't got to understand under the hood what these things do, but they are really useful things to know about because it really reduces the complexity for you, and especially you who's not I'm assuming not a coder. It really helps distance you from actually the complexity of like actually going in and setting up your database, because it does it for you, that's why I use Prisma. I mean, even me as a coder, like I'm lazy. I don't want to go and write SQL scripts to build databases. God no, I got better things to do in my day. So I use Prisma as I'm going along, right? So like, let's say, okay, so I start my project off first of all, and let's take our use case here. I know probably the very first thing I want the user to do is to sign up for our newsletter. Okay, Okay, so now in my head, I'm going, okay, so I can sign up for a newsletter. That means that probably I'm going to need to store some information. I'm probably going to need to store their email address. I'm probably going to need to store their opt-in or their email confirmation. I'm probably going to need to store their name. That's probably enough for newsletter stuff, because like all you're going to be doing in the back is like, pulling that list of emails and email addresses and sending them in some other system. So in that scenario, like, okay, so my front end has a form, my back end needs to have an API route to accommodate this, and my database needs to have the ability to store the information I want to store. Now, as long as you break it down for Cursor into steps, I don't think you need to worry about going back to front or front to back. The important thing is don't give it too much to do in one go. Small, concise chunks. So you could say, okay, build me the form. Doesn't need to do anything for now, just build me the form. And it will build you a basic form. You say, okay, so now using Prisma Cursor, build me the model that I need to be able to store this. And it will go off and it'll build a model for you. And then say, okay, Cursor, push this change to my database. And it does it all for you. And that's why I'm a big fan of Prisma. That's exactly how I use it. Now, I am a coder, and I could, if it wasn't lazy, build scripts, but hell no. And that's what I like. What are all these tools we're talking about? The productivity tools, right? They're getting you to a point in time where you can deliver faster than you could without them. If you have to get into the weeds, I'm not saying don't, but like if you have to get into the weeds of like writing SQL scripts and learning SQL, like that's an effort, right? And that's going to slow you down considerably. So find ways not to do it, and Prisma is one of those ways. Does that even answer your question? I rambled on there a bit.
Yeah, I think so. And again, the only reason I asked that is because I'm a newbie. I realized I had some syntax errors that caused train wrecks between my database and my flow. So that's why I was asking if I should do it backwards. So these other tools are new to me. I'm taking notes and I will learn about them as I go. And
yeah,
thank you for the input and the proper way to start, I guess. So.
Yeah, not a problem. And again, like as with all this stuff, you just need to know what's like my whole intent with this is to show you how to tell it what to do, not for you to do any of it. Like that's, again, productivity tools. We want to be hands off the keyboard as much as we can. We want it to be doing the work. And that's why I talk about some of these. If I thought they were in any way complex or out of reach for people, I wouldn't talk about it. But I think they're very, even for people who have never coded before, I think tools like Prisma are where you can just tell Cursor to build it and push it to your database. Like that's exactly what you want to be doing as a non-coder. Exactly. You don't want to be worried about what's happening under the hood. So good question. Okay, so back to the documentation. What time are we? 1:05. Okay, back to the documentation. So we have our PRD, we have our phase plans, we have a metric ton of diagrams to show. Cool. So did I do anything else? Oh yeah, the last thing I did was like I asked it to put together a style guide based on the images that I gave it earlier. So again, when it's building UIs, it has something to reference. And then there's my style guide there. You can just see it's looking at primary colors, secondary colors, yada yada yada, all the kind of stuff all in here. Again, something for you to review. You don't need to know this inside out, but just make sure, for example, it is actually using the colors that you want to use. You know what I mean? And tell it to adjust if not. That's my style guide. And then, okay, this bit's really, really important as you are going through your project. So you want to have a ton of documentation. Now, you don't want to write it, and we'll get into that, but you want to have documentation everywhere in your project. How you keep control of that documentation within your project structure. And what do I mean by in the project structure? So, for example, if you're building out components of your UI, so let's say you're building out a dashboard, or you're building out a intake form, or you're building out a static web page that's going to have tiles on it. You need to be able to, especially for non-coders among us, you need to be able to reference back to documentation to understand what you did, right? So the point is you would have what I call the master README, and this would sit in the root of your project in your documents folder. And then for every new component you build, or for every new feature that you build, you get Cursor to write in-depth README that sits alongside where your feature is in the project structure, and then you reference back to the master README file. So at any point in time, you can go to the master README file and you can say, oh, I want to just remind myself what I did with the UI dashboard. And you go in there and it'll give you a link. You can go and read what you did in there. It's part of the instructions that I give when I'm giving cursor instructions on building things. I point it. We'll talk about this in a second. I'll point you to a particular task. I will say, here are my documentations related to the task. Please review where we are in the project. And just make sure it's getting itself up to speed. Getting itself up to speed. But then the last thing I always say is create documentation. So like write the code, write the test, create documentation alongside it. Super useful. And again, like for example, if you are putting together a proof of concept, and you get to the point where you think, yeah, this is going to be useful, but actually I'm not a coder. I probably need to get an actual developer to just double check my work. Having things like that where everything is referenced and cross-referenced, to be able to hand that to someone to say, okay, here's the project structure, like it's unbelievably valuable. And will save you a ton of time in trying to figure out what's going on. Because again, you get into anything complex, your folder structure is going to be big, you're going to have a ton of components. And if you don't understand what they all are in human readable form, you're going to get lost and you will break it and ask me how I know. Okay, so that is the master README. And then the last thing I did, and this is something I created this because I'm going to share this with you all afterwards. Before you have cursor write any line of code, you need to get familiar with pushing your changes to GitHub. So for the uninitiated amongst us, GitHub is a repository that you use to keep record of historical changes to your code, such that if you do get in a muddle, if you do break something, you have points in time where you had working functionality that you can just roll back to. So instead of having to start your complete project again, you can say, okay, roll me back to this bit because I know it was working there, just delete everything I've done since then, and you get back to working code. This getting started guide will get you guys going in terms of like how to use GitHub and how to set up a repo and stuff. But if you want to not go insane, if you want to give yourself a break and make sure that you have avenues to step back if you make mistakes, because you will make mistakes. I do every day. I use this every day. GitHub will give you that ability to just step back and make sure that you have a version history that you can spin back up. Okay, so that is all of the documentation that I would create. Okay, so what do I do with it now that I've created it? So this is our blank project structure, nothing in it, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is grab yes. So all of the documentation that we just talked about, I have organized it into our phase folders that we're going to look at. So you can see in each phase we have our checklist and our diagram. You can see all the documents that we talked about here. So we have our PRD, our user flows, our delivery plan, master README, our GitHub beginner's guide, all located in one place. Okay. What you can also do is, if you want to give cursor specific instructions on how you want it to behave and how you want it to handle different scenarios, you can get into looking at cursor settings and then going into rules. So in rules, this is basically my standard rules for every project that I go in. So you can see in here, what I'm telling you is you're an expert in React, Next, JavaScript, TypeScript, because that's a lot of what I do, right? So I needed to understand how I wanted to build the code. I want to give it some guidelines, etc., etc. And then, so that's my global rules that apply to every project. And then if you have project-specific rules, you can add them in here as well. But going back to the docs for a second. Okay, so I have my docs. What is the first thing I should do?
Sorry to interrupt, Rob. Could you post those rules too at a later point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Awesome. That'd be helpful. Thank you.
no problem. First thing I'm going to do, very first thing I'm going to do in here is exactly, I'm not going to do it now because it takes 5 to 10 minutes and I'm going to waste everyone's time, but set up my GitHub repo, right? So at the point where all I have is documentation in my project, I want to go to GitHub, I'm going to set up my repo, I want to push my changes that I created here in my documents up to that repo. There is your starting point in your project before you do anything else, right? So I think I would probably want to talk about Git a little bit before we talk about
Hey, Rob,
yeah.
quick question. How did you push that from Claude, from Anthropic desktop to Cursor? All of the files. Did you save them or?
Oh yeah, no, sorry, dude. This is a little bit of prep I done this morning. So like I went through that process this morning.
Oh, okay.
Download.
Like,
Yeah.
what magic did I miss? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, we're not there yet. Yeah, I just have them in the docs folder. I just pasted them. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about Git. And please ask me a ton of questions on this because arguably this is your most important tool for all of the reasons I just said. If you're not using this correctly, you are going to build things from scratch over and over and over again because you don't have point in times to go back to, right? So what is Git branching? So I'm going to try and keep this as high level as I can. GitHub is a layer on top of an application called Git, and Git is the actual repository version history mechanism. Within Git, you get to create what are called branches. So at the point where you push all your documents to your GitHub repo for the first time, they will get pushed to a branch that's called main. This is your golden source of truth for your project. This is your accumulation of working only code, okay? What do I mean by that? So when we have our, let's see if I can zoom into that a little bit. When we have pushed up our, our initial changes, so this in our case would just be our documents, right? In GitHub, we would just have, if you navigate your repo, you'll see your folder structure exactly like it is in Cursor. But at that point, that's your first version history, right? So you don't want to break that. You don't want to go back and have to redo your document structure or redo conversations you've had. So what you do is you create a branch. So main is your main branch. You create, in our case, a branch called phase 1. So phase 1 is going to be exactly what it says on the tin. It's going to be the work we want to do in phase 1. From phase 1 branch, you want to branch off again. So you branch off into another, I've called it feature 1, but whatever the feature is you're working on, your user intake form, dashboard tiles, whatever it is. You get that to a point, you get your feature to a point where your feature is working. Okay. Once your feature is working and you have all the tests written for it and you are 100% confident that it's not broken, you merge your feature, your first feature back into your phase 1 branch. Okay. Then you create another branch called feature 2 and you do exactly the same thing. You work on feature 2 till you get it to a point where it's working and you have all your tests written, you merge it back into phase 1. When you've completed all your tasks in phase 1, and the entirety of phase 1 is working and you have all your tests written, then you merge that back into main. And then you start the process again where you create a branch called phase 2. And then you create a branch off it called feature 1 phase 2. And then you work through it. And what that'll do is limit your blast area essentially to just the feature that you're working on, right? So let's say we built out features 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and each time we create a branch for that. If we get to feature 6 and we absolutely wreck it, which does happen, it's not an if it'll happen to you, it's when. If you absolutely wreck your code, all you've lost is just the work in that feature, because you can switch back to your previous branch and just say, okay, we'll just start again. And spend a bit of time looking at this because it is super important. What you'll see is like when you go into cursor, as you switch between branches, when you're looking at your folder structure visually, it will change because each branch that you change in Git is a record of different things you created or not. So the further back you go, the less will be there. But then if you go forward, it will restore all the files and documents you've created. I don't want to overload people with this, but like at a high level, is that making sense? Okay, cool.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay, so where are we? 10 minutes left. Okay. So we have our understanding of Git. We have all of our documents in here. Okay, how do I actually meaningfully start this project? And this, we'll see how this goes in the next 10 minutes. We might roll this over to next week and just work through this. So the first thing I want to do is make sure, close that out, make sure that Cursor is aware of what we are trying to do. Okay, so I'm going to add to the chat my PRD. I'm going to add my delivery plan, and I'm going to add my user flows mermaid diagram. So this should give it enough to understand exactly what we're trying to do. I'm going to say, please review the attached documents and give me back a summary of what we are trying to build. Okay. So we'll let that do its thing for a second. So it's going to hopefully going to go and review the docs and give you back the summary. Now at this point, this is your opportunity to correct it if it misunderstands. And you can do that directly in chat. But if it's a misunderstanding in the documentation that you have, you can ask it to correct the documentation so it doesn't get confused in the future. Because LLMs have context window. Claude's isn't massive. I think it's at most 200,000 tokens. The more you put into that, the more it will forget. If you're in long chats with it, it will forget what you told it at the start. So you need to have these reference points. You're able to say, okay, stop for a second, go back and look at the doc. Let's start this again. Okay, so let's just quickly review what it gave me back. So education was on my website with two main purposes: AI tools, documentation for vibe coding projects. Exactly. It's exactly what I wanted this for. It talks about the key components being a landing page in the AI tools directory. It talks about the tech stack. It gives me a little summary at the end. Okay, great. So I'm comfortable now. It understands what we're trying to achieve in this. So the next thing I do is say, here's the checklist that we created earlier. So I'm going to give it this. And I'm going to give it our phase one diagram. And this may or may not be successful because I'm just looking at here and it's the first few tasks are set up the GitHub repository, the git ignore, yada, yada. But essentially what I'm doing is what I would come in here and say, okay, for phase one, let's start on, let me just see if I can pick something here. Let's start on initial, yes, Chase.
Hey, if you have the GitHub MCP server connected, could you just tell it to go and create all of the files that you need in your repo as well?
Yeah, so technically yes, but actually my experience with that GitHub MCP server has not been amazing. So, but that being said, you can just like Cursor and Claude know the Git commands anyway. So if you just tell it what you want to do, it will give you back a command and you just run it.
Oh.
Yeah, you haven't got to remember what git branch -a or git commit -m quotes. You know, it will figure that stuff out. You just tell it what you want to do. Cool. I find that to be much easier to use and much more successful than actually the MCP server. It's a little bit jank. It doesn't always work. For me anyway, I don't have great experience with it. Cool. Okay, so where are we? Yeah. Okay, so phase one. Let's start on the initial tasks. before we do anything else from the documents provided, can you set up the basic project structure, create a README for it, link this to the master README, then stop. Now that bit at the end will save your ass, right? Then stop. Do not let it continue past the task that you asked it to do, okay? So we'll see what it does. We'll just set it running. Yeah, I knew it's going to look at that. Don't worry about it. Right, get for now. Just create the structure. Okay, so this is actually what I wanted it to do. So it's going to look at what we've got in there already. It's creating the README first for some reason. So you can see the README. Oh, because we're in the root of the project. So it's created a core README at the root of the project. That kind of makes sense. It's now saying, now here's another tip. There is the functionality within Cursor to turn on what was historically called YOLO mode. They call it something else now. I can't remember exactly what they call it. Don't do that. Don't let AI have free reign on your code base for all of the reasons that we just talked about. You need to keep its focus small. So I don't even let it run commands without my approval. Now that means I've got to babysit it a bit more than probably I would like, but it gives me the confidence that it's not running rogue and breaking stuff on me. So we'll just let it. Oh yeah, it always thinks it's in Linux. Always. So its first attempt at a command is always a Linux command. There we go. Okay, so you can see there, it has started to create the project structure. So we have our public folder, our test folder, our prisoner folder, because we know we're going to be doing that. And you can see up here in our app folder, we have the basic structure for our different components, API, library styles, yada, yada, yada. That's all in there. Great. Okay, good. Now, again, keeping the context small and making sure you are focused. This is the end of this chat with Cursor, right? So the last thing you say is make sure any READMEs are referenced in the master README. And then once it's done this, once it's referenced its documentation, I strongly advise you to create a new chat for the next specific task and just rinse and repeat then. For every specific task, create a chat, give it very specific instructions, tell it to stop when you want it to stop, tell it to create the README, reference it in the master README, stop, rinse and repeat. Yeah, so you can see, yeah, so it's references, not exactly where I want it, but it's references stuff in there, which is fine. But you can see it's created a README where it's now started to reference the other READMEs that we created in the project. So it just links it all together. So again, when you're going, like if you have to leave a project for a month because, you know, whatever life gets in the way, you can come back to it, you can read your documentation, you can put the pieces together and figure out where you are. But I'm not going to do it here, but the other thing you would do, sorry, as the very last thing is this checklist document. So you tell it, you say, okay, so phase one checklist, can you mark as done the particular task you have done? And what you'll see it do is come in here and it'll just X out exactly where it's got to through your task list. And again, visually for you to understand where you got to the last time you're looking at it, super useful. But again, for Cursor, super useful because you can go in there and say, okay, we're actually on phase 2, task 4. So let's look at phase 2, task 4, Cursor, and give it the documentation for that step, rinse and repeat. And that is the guts of how to, that was an hour of me yapping on, but that is the guts of how to not go insane when trying to do this. This is about keeping focused, keeping cursor focused, documenting everything, giving yourself the ability to roll back when mistakes are made, not if. You will make them, and giving yourself the ability to roll back without losing too much of the work that you've been working on. And especially with the Git stuff, like you can get as granular as you feel comfortable in there. So like if you want to go 7 branches deep, do it, if that makes sense to you, if it helps you feel more comfortable that your focus is tiny for each bit you want to do, absolutely work away. But do use GitHub to make sure you're saving your version history along the way. I think, was there anything else? I mean, we're almost at time. So like, what have we got? 90 seconds. Questions? Yes, Ralph.
You knew I was going to ask something. So great. This was very interesting. Thank you. Helps a lot. I know this sets up your initial project, but how do you keep this thing focused when you have an issue and you want to change a specific amount of code? And here's a good example. So I basically used Windsurf, equivalent here. Built a pretty complex project, but the SQL was just all standard, SQL statements, which is ugly. So I wanted to use an ORM, and I said, basically convert it to SQL alchemy because I was using Python at the time, and it just went in a circle and down spiraled. So how do you? I mean, and that's the reason you use Git right there. Change your, it'll save you multiple times. But how do you get it out of that circle and try to focus on maybe specific pieces instead of just saying, hey, change this from SQL statements to, an ORM?
Yeah. Okay. So that is, by definition, a planning task, right? So at that point where you are building your code out and you realize actually structure is incorrect, you need to go back into planning mode. So at that point, you go back. For me, I'm out of Cursor then at that point, and I'm going back into Claude, and I'm talking to it about what I want to do, and I'm helping it understand what my options are. And again, creating a very specific, and like you can give Claude Desktop access to your code base locally, which is super useful. So you can point it to that. It will have all the documents we created. You just explain to it what you're trying to do, walk through it, get it to make either amend the documentation that you have or create new documentation to do, what would essentially be a new feature in your case, where you're building in the ORM in the background, and again bring those back in, very specific tasks, and say, okay, I'm not asking you to completely change the SQL in the background and the ORM and the model. And what I want you to do first is just update the model, just the model. Just make sure we have field in the model. Okay.
Perfect. So that makes sense. I basically am starting to that process based on what I'm learning here today. So I give it my sources and describe this, and then using that, I modified it, or I'm going to modify it to basically, make those changes and have it regenerate the code. So awesome. Thanks. Great demo.
No problem. Not a problem at all. I don't know what I'm going to do next week. I'll figure something out. I might just turn up and you all can ask me a bunch of questions about all this stuff. Hopefully you'll find it useful. If you didn't, feel free to slate me in the comments in the community. Go for it. I'm a big boy in thick skin. Do it. If there is anything in particular, like I have this hour set aside every week to come and sit in front of you. Some of these weeks I'm sure I'll have stuff that I want to talk about, but like I want to leave a good portion of these open for you. I know Zubair does tech support when it comes to the workflow stuff. So like think of 50% of these sessions as tech support specifically for this. So like where did you get stuck in the last week on your vibe coding journey? And what can I help you with? But again, like if there's anything specific that you want me to dive into, do give me a bit of notice and I'll make sure I've got something prepped for these sessions.
What if you continued on with this project and built it as a co-build, like in your other sessions?
So we can, but it'll be very boring.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Because most of what you'll be looking at actually is cursor writing code. Like that, like 70% of the time it's doing something. 30% of the time, maybe I'm telling it what I need it to do. I might boil this down a bit more and just walk you through, because I actually think that'd be helpful, just to throw a few more steps in here of like, okay, where do we go from here? Just to level set on expectations, it will be more useful for me to show you the steps to walk through than to walk through a whole project. It will be like, for example, today, in my eyes, it's more useful for me to teach you how to fish here rather than actually building a project in front of you. I want you guys, like, this is a learning journey for all of us, right? I want you guys to be comfortable in your experimentation, comfortable breaking things, getting used to these new technologies and how to use them without actually putting your hands on the keyboard, in essence, to write code or whatever. But
Sure.
yeah,
The only reason I had mentioned that was, like, in your reference to fishing, you might tell somebody, put the lure on your line.
Yeah.
And that makes total sense to you, but we might not know what that means. So you walking through and showing us how to tie the knot. Oh,
Yeah.
now I get it,
Yeah,
So-
yeah. No, that makes sense, right? But my point is, I don't want to make any assumptions on what you all want to know, because I could sit here and talk to you for 45 minutes and you could be bored out your face and think that's not what I turned up for. So if there are things, specific things, like, go away, think about this, experiment with it, build out your own version of your documentation. If and when you get stuck, and if and when you have questions, shoot me a DM or tag me in the community, and I will make sure to either address them there, or the next time we catch up, we will walk through those specific scenarios to kind of help you get unstuck. Because again, think about what I said at the start. I make assumptions, and I've been working in tech for years. I make assumptions on what I think people know, and it's normally wrong. And I don't want to make assumptions and talking to you about something that isn't relevant. So like, as and when you come up against these things, and it's fine for me to go into Fridays with a list of 5 or 6 things, and they can all be different. And we'll walk through each individual scenario. That's fine. You just got to tell me what you need.
Awesome. Well, overall, thank you. Learned a lot. Took a lot of notes.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, so I will figure out how to package all this up somehow and share it somewhere. I will share. Actually, I'm going to give you all a bit of homework as well, right? So, in the last 2 days, I got made aware of a flow for Cursor that essentially will give it memory of its own, and memory is a fairly loose term. But if you go away and Google Cursor memory bank, you will start to find things that I'm talking about. I didn't want to talk about it today too much because I haven't tried it myself, and I definitely don't want to show you something that I'm not comfortable with. But do a bit of Googling. It seems like a fairly easy concept to understand. Not super technical. It's about cursor rules. That'd be a good thing for you guys to go away and have a look at. But I do have to drop off now in a second. The biggest thing I can say to you all is get comfortable breaking shit, because that's actually a lot of what you'll do, right? It doesn't, don't get frustrated. Journeys are not a straight line, right? And that includes learning how to do this stuff. It's not a straight line. Sometimes you need to go left, sometimes you need to go right, sometimes you need to take 4 steps back. But it's all a process, so don't get frustrated by it. Use the community for what the community is for. Tag me or anyone else when you get stuck and you have questions. Don't feel like you're on your own. Like, that's why we call it a community and not a course, because we want to help you guys out. But you just got to tell us what you need. All right.
Thanks, Rob. Awesome session, man.
No worries. Hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you, folks. See you later.